It's the Brian Lehrer Show on WNYC. Good morning again, everyone. So now we turn to artificial intelligence and a controversy it has created in the book publishing world. Last week, Hachette Book Group, which is one of the largest publishers in the United States, right, pulled a forthcoming book after widespread allegations online that the author used AI to help write the horror novels. The author, Mia Ballard, has denied using AI to help write the book titled Shy Girl. She said an editor she had hired for the self-published version of the novel had used AI without her knowledge. But still, there's an AI component to this story. Hachette has canceled the book's spring release here in the United States and said it will also discontinue the book in the UK, where it was already published last fall. And the stat I see is that it has already sold 1,800 print copies. Our next guest argues that the Shy Girl fiasco, as she calls it, highlights not only the challenges of AI in fiction that publishers are having a hard time meeting, but also how that might influence readers' trust in the art form. Andrea Bartz is a novelist, most recently the author of The Last Ferry Out. Her guest op-ed in the New York Times that you might have read is titled "The Shy Girl Fiasco Shows Why Trust in Writers is Plummeting." Andrea Bartz, thanks for coming on to talk about your op-ed. Welcome to WNYC.
Thanks so much. Thank you for having me on.
So for listeners who haven't been following this story, how did Hachette come to realize that Shy Girl was written partly or largely with AI?
My understanding is that it came to light largely through readers. This book began as a self-published book and got enough traction that Hachette picked it up to publish it more traditionally. But readers began noticing that passages from it sounded to them like AI slop, and they made TikToks about it. They, started conversations about it. This led to a New York Times investigation of it, and when the New York Times sort of handed over their information about the allegations, that was when Hachette decided they were no longer going to publish this book.
I don't know if you have an example that's easy to say on the radio, but do you have an example of some of the language in the book, a line from the book or a paragraph or something that looked to readers like AI slop?
I don't have the book in front of me, but there are certain telltale signs that come up a lot. For example, using lists of 3 items. This book is tight, taut, and page-turning. Things that, real writers do, but they're now seen as sort of the hallmarks of, a ChatGPT or another generative AI model.
By the way, for people who don't know, what is the word slop? I know that's an expression that people use, AI slop. Why slop?
Yeah, so it generally means whatever writing a large language model such as ChatGPT is putting out. It can also mean things like videos, things like AI generated images. It's basically the output of one of those models. And so it sounds very derogatory, but I use it sort of as anything that a model is giving us that's not written by a human or created by a human, but sort of is a, facsimile of a human-made creation.
But I guess one scary element of this story is that AI, if it was largely AI, wrote a novel that gained enough traction that it went from self-published to Hachette picking it up.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And I know, we all remember what ChatGPT was like when it first was released to the public a few years ago and how much it's improved since then. These models are just improving so quickly, exponentially. They're getting better and better at impersonating human authors. And so my fear is that as they get better and better, we won't really be able to rely on our internal slop detectors anymore to say, that sounds like AI to me and not a person.
Why do you frame your op-ed in the context of trust?
So I think that, authors create books to connect with readers, right? We are, especially us novelists, we are, alchemizing our humanity into something we put on the page that we hope readers are going to respond to. It's going to resonate with them. And so there's this sort of implicit trust between a writer that I'm putting something real out to you and the reader to say, if I feel something from reading this, it's because I'm having a human connection with the author who wrote these words. And so, that trust could erode if readers begin to worry that anything they've written, oh, that hit my ear so right. Wait, but was that actually a human or was that AI slop that was so well done I didn't notice? And once that kind of contract of trust erodes, that's bad news for writers and readers and for publishing, which is an industry already struggling in a lot of ways.
All right, listeners, calling all creatives, writers, artists, musicians, anyone else. How has artificial intelligence been showing up in your various artistic media? 212-433-WNYC. You can also weigh in on the idea in Andrea's op-ed that the specter of AI in fiction can erode the audience's trust. And again, you can apply this to any art form that you're involved with. Have there been any shy girl moments in your industry where an artist was called out for not disclosing AI in their work? Or maybe you use AI in a way that's really beneficial to your work and you think there's a line before which it's okay. 212-433-WNYC, maybe not exactly to produce a work, but to help organize your creative process in some way, maybe something like that. So for those of you pro-AI, in some instances, we invite you to make your case too. 212-433-WNYC, 212-433-9692, call or text. And of course, to listeners who were actually following the Shy Girl fiasco, as Andrea calls it, around the novel Shy Girl, we can hear some of your hot takes on the controversy itself. Self-identified avid readers. Maybe you're living in the UK and you already bought the book. How did you feel after reading it? Maybe enjoying it, and then hearing how it was produced. 212-433-WNYC, 212-433-9692. Call or text, calling all creatives. So, Andrea, is there any legitimate use, kind of as part of the, caller invitation I was framing there, for AI in creating a novel or any other work of art?
My opinion on the topic is no. I don't think there is any use for something that was built on the backs of unpaid and non-consenting artists in order to create something that is trying to push them out of the market. So I say no. However, there are other authors who feel like it's fine to use for idea generation, for different elements like that. There's even examples of authors sort of proudly saying, I co-write my novels with AI. I disagree with that, but I think at minimum, readers have shown via this Shy Girl fiasco that they really want authors to be upfront about whether they're using it or not.
Do you feel like it's even unfair competition for you? You're a writer of thriller novels. I see a category which can sometimes overlap with horror novels, like the genre that Shy Girl was marketed as. And I saw that the University of Cambridge recently put out a report highlighting that certain genres of fiction are easier for AI to copy, and they are primarily romance, according to that report, but also thrillers and horror. So I want to get your thoughts on whether more categories or certain categories of writing are more susceptible, and if you feel it's in a way unfair competition.
Yeah, absolutely. So I will say, as the models get better and better, I do think that no author will be safe. I think even a nonfiction book could be potentially AI written. I mean, think about a student writing a paper for school. A nonfiction book might not be that different once these models get good enough to really sound like an author putting together an entire book. But I agree that right now it's these commercial genres, like you said, like mysteries, like romance, that do seem a little bit more susceptible. And that makes sense to me. They're generally a little more focused on plot and kind of following a formula, if you will, than on character development. Though, of course, a good story is going to balance both. But I think everyone is at risk, even those writing really beautiful, heartfelt, character-driven literary fiction. Last year on X, Sam Altman, the CEO of ChatGPT, teased a new model of ChatGPT that he says is exceptionally good at creative writing. And to prove it, he showed its output when prompted to write autofiction. And I can't think of a genre, that AI would be less suited for, but I really think it's a question all authors of all stripes will have to confront. And I absolutely think that I, as a human author, will be competing with, books by AI models that nobody has to pay, that can spit out a book very, very quickly.
Right.
And that's quite scary to me.
Yeah, and on how quickly and effectively it can spit it out. And before we go to some interesting looking callers who are waiting now, I see that you conducted a little experiment. You gave ChatGPT a prompt to attempt to write in your style. How'd that go?
Right. So shortly after ChatGPT was released, so this is not even the current model. I shudder to think how good it's gotten since then. But out of curiosity, I said, write a short story in the style of author Andrea Bartz. And what it came back with, it wasn't really a good story. It was more of a scene, but it was an eerie, sort of uncanny valley version of my writing. It really nailed some of the stylistic choices I make, some of the patterns that I often follow in my writing, some of the word choices. And I thought it won't be long before somebody can, train an AI model to sound like them and then just have it do the writing for them.
How did that feel when you saw that it could copy some of your writing style pretty well? How did it just feel, like, emotionally?
It felt incredibly violating. It felt very, very creepy. I have had humans plagiarize my work before, and have found out about it after the fact and have felt very violated. But this was different because it wasn't a human doing it. It was a a machine that was trained on my books amidst other books. So of course it can sound like me. It's not so much that when I write, I sound like AI. It's that AI has been trained to sound like us human authors, and that just creates a real fiasco to keep coming back to that word.
Let's talk to a playwright who's calling in. Patty in Connecticut. Patty, you're on WNYC. Hello.
Hi, good morning, Brian. Thanks for having me on. I'm a playwright, and it's submission season, and the hardest thing about submitting your play is writing those synopses. And so my husband sort of said to me about a month ago, why don't you just try ChatGPT? And I was pretty blown away by how it was able to synopsize my play in a way that I really, really struggle, spend many, many hours on after, spending a year or two on the script. So I'm kind of a fan of it for log lines and synopses.
Interesting. You have any reaction to that, Andrea? It sounds like she already wrote the play. She was looking for a synopsis, and rather than do what might be a little bit of grunt work, if I can characterize it that way, AI did that part for her.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. AI is really good at that. We've all seen the notes it can send after a Zoom meeting or something like that. For me, at that point, the use of AI shifts from being about putting in the grunt work to all of the other downstream reasons it's bad, in my opinion. The effects on the environment, the fact that it was, built on plagiarism and on stealing ebooks from authors without paying. I also think that the act of summarizing something is sort of how we learn, for example, if you read a long PDF and then write a summary of it afterward, that's how you sort of commit and figure out what's the important thing to take away from this. And so having AI do the work for you, or worse, opening up a PDF and clicking, oh yeah, just show me the summary. It takes away the step that actually gets it into our brains. So I know this is a really narrow use. And so I try to say this non-judgmentally, but I really am afraid of what AI is doing for our critical thinking, for our brains, for our ability to look at something long and complicated and figure out the takeaway from it.
Here's a different kind of writer. Kevin in Bridgeport, a songwriter. Kevin, you're on WNYC. Hello.
Hello. Yes. Hi. Thanks for having me on. I'm a musician and a songwriter and a performing musician, and I make my living mainly from performance. But I have a lot of songs that I've been kind of hanging on to, and I'm like, this year I'm going to put all these songs out that I've had, some of them for years. And I started thinking, people are going to think, you must be using AI, because all of a sudden you're putting out a bunch of songs. We've never heard these songs before. So I'm like, wow, I'm going to have to like probably put without AI, written without AI. That's one part of the fear, which is, not a big, it's like, it's not going to stop me or anything, but it's like now this is a reality. And the thing that, I've worked with other songwriters when we collaborate, and sometimes I'll show them some of my songs just so they get a sense of what I'm doing while we're writing. And then I've noticed that like a week or two later, when we get together, they'll be like kind of stealing some of my lyrical ideas. So then I'm like, oh, okay, well, I don't want to necessarily show them all my tunes because I want this to be whatever we're coming up with. Because I thought, well, there's some songs that I haven't finished, and it's usually for me the lyrics that are always the most challenging. So I thought, well, what would it be like to see if AI could finish this song lyrically? But then I'm like, I don't want to put my music into the algorithm out there and then have it just become a part of what anybody else could easily call up. But the final thing is that drives me, that I feel about with writing prose and music, especially with music, it's an expression of emotion. It's an emotional expression. And AI has no emotion. It's just mimicking, what we're doing. And I just don't know how. I've heard songs that have become popular, and now Spotify, apparently, I've heard, they create their own AI songs and put them out for monetary reasons because they can flood their playlists with songs that they created and make 100% of the royalties because it's not a real, it's not a person. So there are lots of very ethical issues with it, and I just feel like emotionally that it's not a person, and it's not coming from an emotional place. So it's kind of frightening to think that people connect with something that is not connected to a person or an emotion.
Yeah, very articulate, Kevin, on a number of elements there. Stay there for a second. I'm curious if our guest, Andrea Bartz, the novelist who wrote the New York Times op-ed called The Shy Girl Fiasco, shows why trust in writers is plummeting. And for those of you just joining, Shy Girl was a novel that was pulled by its publisher when they figured out that a lot of it was written by AI. Andrea, I'm curious if you want to talk to Kevin at all.
Yeah, thank you for calling in and sharing all that. I think there's a lot of parallels between what I'm experiencing as, a novelist and what you're experiencing as a musician and songwriter. I think we both share a desire to connect with our fans, right? The creator-patron relationship is really important to both of us. And AI really threatens to erode that. And I agree with you that it's really scary and it raises a lot of ethical questions. And I guess my hope is that readers and music fans and all patrons are going to decide, well, even if the AI stuff is technically better, I want the human stuff anyway. I read books or I listen to a song because I want to feel that connection with the person behind it, not the machine behind it. But it's really scary, and people can be shady about what they're creating and whether or not they did use AI to do it. And I think there's really a lot of parallels between what's going on in your business and mine right now.
Yeah, and I'm so glad, Kevin, you brought up. Oh, go ahead. You go.
No, I was just going to quickly say that I'm kind of amazed that I'm speaking with you right now because I read your op-ed when it came out, and I was like, oh, yes, oh my God. And I read about the Shy Girl thing, too, and I didn't realize, all of the elements of that. But go ahead, Brian. What were you going to say?
Well, let me ask a follow-up question to both of you from another listener who sent us a text that said, why not just have a labeling regime? We have natural and synthetic fibers, natural or chemical food. Why not natural and synthetic books? And to me, Kevin, that reminded me of something you said earlier in your call, which is you're thinking of putting out your songs with a label not written with AI.
I think it's a great idea. I think people should know what they're getting. And some people won't care. But like when I'm performing live, the thing that's amazing about it is, and I'm sure it's just like a play, or when you're in you go to a museum and you actually see, I remember seeing a Van Gogh piece for the first, it's like you have a connection.
Yeah.
You have this emotional, visceral connection. And when I'm performing, the audience is feeling something. And then as a performer, that's coming back to me. And it affects how I perform and how so, I'm sure that in terms of being an author, maybe you don't feel that until you're maybe doing a reading or whatever, but you get letters from your fans and they tell you how important it is and what it means to them. And I don't know, I just feel like I think people want to know that it's a real emotion and a real experience. So
Kevin,
I think that's a good idea.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I'm so glad, Andrew, that he explicitly brought human emotion into it as the driver of the arts by people as opposed to AI. How do you feel about maybe releasing your books with a label, not written with AI?
Well, I think it's a good step. I understand the push to put on our own work. Okay, this is not written by a human and not by AI. But the problem is that now that it's becoming clear that readers really don't seem to love books written by AI. Look what happened with Shy Girl. Look what happened with novelist James Frey's latest release, which he kind of talked about himself as a writer who co-writes with AI, and then his book maybe didn't do as well as expected. That will incentivize authors to potentially lie, to not be honest about using AI, or to sort of justify it to themselves. Oh, well, I rewrote what it wrote, so it doesn't actually count as me using generative AI. Certifications do exist. Some are better than others. But my understanding is that AI detectors are running on large language models too. It seems like sort of an arms race. And some of them lack teeth. Some of them are more self-reported. An author can sign, an attestation saying that they wrote it without AI. But that doesn't mean that they necessarily did. And so if there's a lack of trust in the certifications as well, then they don't really help.
Wasn't James Frey the same guy who got into trouble like 20 years ago for fabricating or exaggerating parts of his memoir?
He sure is. That is a man who courts controversy.
And now with AI. Naomi in Brooklyn, a different kind of creator, a cook. You're on WNYC. Hi, Naomi.
Hi. I was just calling in because this conversation came up in my work recently. A lot of the creative part of my work is able to be creative because I have to deal with accounting and finance and things like that. So I use AI from time to time as a qualitative calculator. So it kind of ties in elements of like, okay, well, if I need to use 300 pieces of this specific kind of cheese or a teaspoon of this every month, what is that going to cost me per dish, per month? And what's really interesting is I feel like my kind of administrative art enables the creative aspects of my cooking, but also like is really critical to me sustaining myself in business. And I worked with someone once who just like kind of, you could tell that their entire work was just regurgitated by AI. And not only was it really frustrating because it made operations really difficult and complicated because it wasn't fully fleshed out or in touch with the reality of our industry, but it kind of felt insulting because, there's so many elements of like every aspect of my intellect that go into my work. It's not only the food and anticipating the needs of the clients or our guests, but it's like knowing exactly how and where to use specific kinds of information. It's not just, plug and play.
Yeah. Naomi, thank you very much. I'm going to sneak one more in here. Is it Lana or Iana in New Rochelle, professor of literature?
Yes.
Hi there.
Yes, it's Lana. Yes, I am a French literature professor and a first-time author of a novel set in contemporary Paris, Berlin, and New York. I have never used AI for even one sentence of this manuscript. Fortunately, I have saved many iterations of the manuscript since I began writing it in 2022. It is now definitively done. I have to move on. I'm trying to find an agent. How can I protect myself from accusations of having used AI?
Andrea, anything for her?
It's a really important question and one that I hope we soon have better answers for. It sounds like you're doing the right thing by just saving every single iteration of it. I write my books in Google Drive myself in Google Docs, and so I have a revision history. But I don't know that there's much we can do beyond that right now. Some of the AI detectors have really high rates of false positives. And so somebody theoretically could say,
wow.
look, this online detector thinks that that's AI, even though it's not. So I think being public about your stance, being upfront about the fact that you did not and will not use generative AI is one thing you can do sort of to protect your reputation. And I think saving every single draft and being really clear to document the painstaking process of writing a book is kind of the best we can do right now.
Lana, I hope that's helpful. We're almost out of time. I'm curious if you think the cancellation of Shy Girl means that publishers are gearing up for this fight in a productive way.
I guess I hope so, but the book got pretty far and got, released in the UK before anyone even seemed to notice at Hachette that there was an issue. So I'm really not sure. Again, it's this arms race where if AI is getting better and better and people are buying the books not realizing that they're partially AI written, why wouldn't publishers just say, great, more product to put out into the market? And so I really hope that there's internal discussions that I'm not privy to about how they're going to, regain and maintain readers' trust and not let this happen again.
Well, the least I can do after you sharing all these thoughts with us and your op-ed is let you plug your book, your latest novel, The Last Ferry Out, which came out last year. 30 seconds for any blurb of yourself that you would like.
Well, thank you for that. The Last Ferry Out is about a woman who travels to the tropical island where her partner died, only to discover that it was no accident, and now she might be trapped on an island with the killer. However, my best-known book, which also has vacation vibes, is called We Were Never Here, and that's about two globe-trotting besties who kill a backpacker in self-defense. But it's not the first time that one of their trips has ended in bloodshed. And I really appreciate that chance to plug my books.
Andrea Bartz wrote the guest op-ed in the New York Times called The Shy Girl Fiasco Shows Why Trust in Writers is Plummeting. And that book. Thanks so much for coming on with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
This conversation was produced without artificial intelligence.
Since WNYC's first broadcast in 1924, we've been dedicated to creating the kind of content we know the world needs. Since then, New York Public Radio's rigorous journalism has gone on to win a Peabody Award and a DuPont Columbia Award, among others. In addition to this award-winning reporting, your sponsorship also supports inspiring storytelling and extraordinary music that is free and accessible to all. To get in touch and find out more, visit sponsorship.wnyc.org.